Jerry Springer, host of TV's most controversial show, dies at 79. Jerry Springer, the former Cincinnati news anchor and mayor who came to preside over the controversial and extremely profitable talk show bearing his name, has died. He was 79. According to NBC affiliate Will It Work, where he once worked as a news anchor, Springer died peacefully Thursday at his home in the Chicago suburbs. The Jerry Springer Show began its multi-decade run in 1991 and, in 1998, at the height of its popularity, beat The Oprah Winfrey Show in the ratings, drawing 12 million viewers. Like Geraldo Rivera, Springer signed on for a show that he thought seemed like the logical next step in his journalism career, a show not unlike Donahue that would take a serious look at a variety of important issues. But as with Geraldo, the pressure to score big in the ratings pretty quickly meant appealing to the lowest common denominator. Springer and his new producer, Richard Dominic, who'd worked at the Weekly World News, made significant changes to the show in order to garner higher ratings in early 1994. And here he was, wrote Todd Vander Werf in a June 2014 piece on Springer on the ARV Club site, no longer exposing America's dark underbelly, but rolling around in it. There were precursors for the Jerry Springer Show, including Donahue and the Morton Downey Jr. Show. Hell, the show's trajectory can be directly tied to the rise of the Ricky Lake Show, a program it would overtake and eventually outlive, wrote Vander Werf. But Springer's gobbled up those shows whole, synthesized them into its DNA, then turned itself up to 11. It was no longer a television show. It was America's ID, going nuts on stage, and the man who presided over it looked like a math teacher. There is nothing about the Jerry Springer Show to be applauded. After all, his guests, representing an enormous variety of lifestyles, deviating from what is perceived as the norm, were packaged as freaks and brought on stage to be mocked by the audience, and to be, at least seemingly, sternly judged by Springer. Vander Werf argued, however, that Springer did a sort of backhanded service to these subcultures, simply by exposing his very large television audience to them, which, despite the mockery, was the first step in normalization. By simply allowing all of these people onto television, even if they were there to slot into certain preformed narratives, the series casually opened the door to a nation that was not as white bread as it desperately insisted it was. There were, for example, people in incestuous, dominant, submissive, or polygamous relationships. While the signature moment of Geraldo was a brawl between neo-Nazis and Jews that resulted in throwing chairs and a broken nose for Rivera, Springer, if not Springer himself, was more interested in sex, the more the bizarre the better, than in politics. The Springer Show's most controversial episode involved a man married to a horse. Yes, sexually speaking, anything but the typical monogamous norm was presented with outrage. Despite Springer's own liberal leanings, he reacted on the show with a stern displeasure, though Vander Werf asserts that the show was fairly progressive when it came to gays and lesbians. As for trans people, he says that while the show judged them as it did everyone else, it dared viewers to find the idea a little alluring. That idea was surprisingly revolutionary. The Springer guests were not only sexually transgressive in the minds of the audience, the vast majority came from the lower end of the social spectrum, many with thick regional accents, accentuating the in-studio and at-home audience's belief that they were above these people, who were deserving of mockery and harsh judgment. One cannot reflect upon Jerry Springer and his show without addressing the fights that erupted on virtually every episode. Often, debated has been whether some or all of those brawls were staged. Of course, if it could be proved that the fights were choreographed or even just pre-planned, that would rob the show of its claim to authenticity. We may never know, but perhaps bringing together people with inherent conflicts in an atmosphere of elevated emotion, with the in-studio audience screaming and chanting at them, virtually guaranteed the eruption of physical altercations. More cynically, those coming on the show were obviously familiar with Springer, and they likely knew, consciously or unconsciously, that outsized emotions and all that may follow from such emotions was implicitly expected of them. Springer himself often seemed supercilious on the show, Perhaps not so much because he felt this or that guest beneath him, but because he felt the entire show beneath him. After all, this was a man of education, a former politician and news anchor. He became rich, of course, by hosting the Jerry Springer Show, and he likely justified hosting the show by saying to himself that if he didn't host it, someone else would. It is clear he yearned for more. The money, as well as the kind of fame he earned from hosting the Jerry Springer Show, did not satisfy him. In 2000 and 2004, he mulled runs for the U.S. Senate, but opted against such a move, realizing realistically that the negative publicity associated with the Jerry Springer Show made victory impossible. Van der Werf, in his piece on the ADV Club site, insisted that Springer was a journalist at heart. He was curious. He really did want to know if that man loved his horse, and he knew we did too. Gerald Norman Jerry Springer was born in Highgate, London, England, to Jewish refugees from Germany. The area is now part of Poland. Both of his grandmothers died in Nazi concentration camps. In January 1949, when Springer was just shy of 5 years old, the family emigrated to the US, settling in Kew Gardens, Queens, New York. He and his sister Evelyn grew up in a small apartment. Springer earned a BA in political science from Tulane University in 1965, becoming a full-fledged member of the civil rights and anti-war generation, according to a 1989 profile in People magazine, and a JD. Degree from Northwestern University in 1968. Springer became a political campaign advisor to Robert F. Kennedy, according to a 1998 profile of Springer in Slate, written by David Plotz. After Kennedy's assassination, he joined the Cincinnati law firm of Frost Jacobs, now Frost Brown Top. Springer spearheaded the effort to lower the voting age in Ohio, testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee in support of ratification of the 26th Amendment. He impressed local Democrats, and at 25 he ran for Congress as a Democrat in 1970, taking 45% of the vote in a traditionally Republican district. 3 days after announcing his candidacy, Springer, an Army reservist at the time, was called to active duty and deployed to Fort Knox. He continued with his campaign after discharge. Springer was elected to the Cincinnati City Council in 1971, but resigned 3 years later after admitting at a press conference to hiring a prostitute. Springer managed to win back his seat in 1975. In 1977, when he ran again, Springer received more votes than any other candidate for the council, which meant, under local law, that he was elected mayor. While mayor, he initiated change in the local jails. When neo-Nazis applied to march, Springer was conflicted, having lost relatives in the camps. But he was a staunch advocate of the First Amendment and allowed them to march. In 1982, Springer sought the Democratic nomination for governor of Ohio, but finished a distant third. Springer considered runs for the U.S. Senate in 2000 and 2004, but opted against it. Springer began his career in broadcasting while still an undergraduate at Tulane, on the university-operated, progressive-format college radio station Wattle F. New Orleans. While mayor of Cincinnati, he offered commentaries that appeared on album-oriented rock radio station WebMem, FM under the banner The Springer Memorandum. These commentaries proved popular, leading to a full-time job in broadcasting. Springer was hired as a political reporter and commentator on NBIC's Well E, at the time, the station with the lowest-rated news show in the Cincinnati market. Later, after he'd been named primary news anchor as well as managing editor, he sought a catchphrase in the tradition of great television newsmen, with the help of some fellow station employees.
He devised his signature line, "Take care of yourself and each other." Within 2 years, he was Cincinnati's #1 news anchor. Together with partner Norma Rashid, he was the most popular anchor in the city for 5 years, according to Plotz's 1998 Slate article, drawing 10 local Emmy Awards for his nightly commentaries, which would eventually become his final thought on Springer.
Springer remained a commentator at World until January 1993, 16 months after the debut of The Jerry Springer Show. Springer delivered the commencement address at his alma mater, the Northwestern University School of Law, in May 2008. Many students criticized the choice of speaker, but he drew a standing ovation from about half the audience, and reviews of the speech were generally positive, according to an article on law firm, marketing agency, website 400.com. In his speech, he declared, "I am not superior to the people on my show, and you are not superior to the people you will represent. That is not an insult. It is merely an understanding derived from a life spent on the front lines of human interaction." Springer penned an autobiography, Ringmaster, that was published in 1998. He is survived by his wife, Mickey Velton, to whom he had been married since 1973, and a daughter, Katie.